622 day of Russian invasion straight from Ukraine. The southern front has been abuzz with activity today, with Ukrainian forces launching a series of HIMARS and Storm Shadow strikes that have targeted over 20 Russian bases and troop concentrations in the past week. In Taganrog, local residents reported hearing a barrage of explosions near the military airfield northwest of the city. Geolocated footage from the area shows plumes of smoke rising in the distance, confirming a strike. Russian sources claim that their air defense systems intercepted at least one Ukrainian missile, with the debris damaging cargo destined for an Il-76 heavy transport aircraft, though the aircraft itself remained intact. Interestingly, the region's governor contradicted mainstream media reports, asserting that the air defense systems were not operational. Meanwhile, a Ukrainian partisan group from Mariupol released footage of the Russian air defense systems near the airfield and claimed that their operations had rendered them ineffective, allowing Ukrainian missiles to strike. Following the explosions, Russians were observed removing their remaining aircraft from the airfield, acknowledging its vulnerability. This development is highly significant, as satellite imagery from Planet Labs reveals that the Russians had planned to convert Taganrog into their primary airbase in the south. After a devastating Ukrainian strike on the Berdyansk airfield, which destroyed or damaged up to a dozen helicopters, the Russians relocated 21 helicopters away from the region. They had initially consolidated their helicopters at the Berdyansk airbase, believing it was safe beyond HIMARS reach. However, after losing 30% of their fleet in an attack mess strike, they relocated their helicopters to Taganrog, assuming it was secure on Russian territory. Today's strike has forced them to relocate yet again. These actions have significantly eased pressure on the front lines and granted Ukrainian forces greater freedom of movement, as Russian K-52 attack helicopters are unable to respond promptly to demands. The onslaught against Russian aviation continued 2 days ago when a powerful explosion was captured on camera in the village of Sadovo, located between the previously mentioned air bases in Berdyansk and Taganrog. Initially, some Russian sources attributed the blast to an electrical short circuit in a warehouse. However, it was later revealed to be a helicopter repair facility. Military bloggers admitted that several Russian helicopters had arrived for maintenance just prior to the strike. Clearly, Russian aviation has been enduring a particularly difficult week. SSA day before the Sadovo explosion, Ukrainians launched a comprehensive strike on Crimea, utilizing not only drones and Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles, but also Neptune missiles and decoy missiles. Upon detecting the takeoff of Ukrainian Su-24M bombers, the Russians immediately deployed smokescreens around the Kerch Bridge in anticipation of an attack. As the missiles veered toward the bridge, the Russians scrambled their jets to intercept them. Anticipating this response, Ukrainians launched Neptune missiles from the opposite side of Crimea, where Russians have been repeatedly targeted by drone strikes. According to Russian sources, the Neptune missiles forced Russian aviation to prioritize these targets, improving the chances of the Scalp missiles evading interception. Additionally, decoy missiles and anti-radiation rockets were launched from the Kherson region, stretching Russian air defense capabilities to their limits. As a result, several missiles struck their intended targets, though not the bridge itself but rather a nearby shipyard. Recently leaked footage shows at least 3 Scalp missiles, one after the other, hitting the Askold ship. Built in 2021, the Askold was one of the newest and most advanced vessels in the Russian Black Sea Fleet. It was capable of carrying and launching 8-caliber missiles, had its own Panzer M air defense system, and an Orlan 10 reconnaissance system. Judging by the extent of the damage, analysts unanimously agree that the ship is beyond repair and will effectively be replaced with a new one. Overall, Ukrainians have executed numerous successful strikes over the past week. The primary goal of most of these strikes was to weaken Russian air power by pushing Russian helicopters so far from the front lines that they can no longer respond promptly to battlefield developments, and by reducing the number of strategic missile and rocket carriers. Incidentally, it was recently confirmed that Iguanas will finally receive attachments capable of launching missiles with a range of 300 kilometers. This is fantastic news because, according to Ukrainian intelligence, the Russians have been amassing missiles in preparation for a massive barrage of attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Currently, The Russians reportedly possess approximately 900 missiles of various types, similar to last year's stockpiles. The destruction of Russian assault helicopters by Ukrainian forces means that there are fewer carriers for these missiles, which should, in principle, reduce the scale of potential strikes, making them more manageable for Ukrainian air defenses. Meanwhile, Ukrainian HIMARS screws have been wreaking havoc on Russian bases, closer to the contact line. Around the same time, Ukrainians opted to once again employ the Bayraktar-HIMARS combo along the Kherson region's shoreline. The footage depicts the drone operator identifying stationary targets like howitzers and tanks, providing their coordinates to the HIMARS screws for destruction, while using the drone's own rockets to eliminate mobile targets like boats. One of the most devastating strikes befell the Russian Atal battalion. A portion of the battalion was intercepted during its relocation to the front, resulting in the incineration of over 10 vehicles and their occupants. Russian volunteers claimed that up to 120 soldiers were killed or wounded. Overall, Ukrainians have executed numerous successful strikes over the past week. The primary goal of most of these strikes was to weaken Russian air power by pushing Russian helicopters so far from the front lines that they can no longer respond promptly to battlefield developments, and by reducing the number of strategic missile and rocket carriers. Incidentally, it was recently confirmed that iguanas will finally receive attachments capable of launching missiles with a range of 300 kilometers.